Hey guys, PIEGUYRULZ here, and welcome back to Square Theory. So, if you've been paying attention to my videos, you probably noticed that Gary-centric episodes don't usually get that good of a rating. Usually they're either scumbob or meh. They very, very rarely get good. So I wanted to examine exactly why that is. Is it just a coincidence? Is it something that's the matter with Gary himself? Do I just have a personal bias against snails or some ridiculous thing like that? So I really want to dive in here and think about why these Gary-centric episodes usually don't do so well. So let's start off with the biggest problem with Gary, and I would say that it is that he can't talk, outside of sleepy time, of course. In general, he's just not able to verbally communicate beyond a meow, or maybe like a no if we're lucky. He just can't talk, and you can have characters that can't talk, but that requires a little bit of extra nuance in non-verbally communicating. You know, you can do things like they do on the show where SpongeBob speaks for him and basically like repeats everything Gary said, but it's always a little bit of an extra hassle, and it always means that we don't get to hear from this character as directly as the other characters. So that's just right off the bat, just kind of one of the things that I think makes it difficult to make an episode entirely around Gary. And speaking of Gary not being able to talk, for some reason, and I don't know why this is, it doesn't have to be like this, there are many, many episodes about Gary that revolve around SpongeBob not understanding Gary correctly and pushing Gary into doing something that Gary doesn't want to do. There are just a number of these episodes that either revolve around or include it as an element, just this misunderstanding between Gary and SpongeBob, which I've noted as weird because in other episodes SpongeBob can understand him just fine, but that's just kind of the plot they keep going with, and I think that really hurts the episodes because they don't really do much more with the character than just these kind of misunderstanding stories, which SpongeBob does a lot in general. But it leads to a lot of repetition, and that particular story type in general leads to my next problem. In these Gary-centric episodes, SpongeBob usually ends up being a jerk. Now, SpongeBob being a jerk can work. It definitely can, but you have to really show him being pushed to his absolute limits, and you have to really make sure it's funny and not doesn't come off as too harsh. Yeah. That it doesn't come off as nasty to the audience. You want to make sure it's funny and not cruel, as it tends to be. Again, they don't have to write these episodes these ways, but just because of the one episode type that they really like to stick Gary with, it does lead to SpongeBob acting just like an insufferable jerk and being really unlikable in those episodes, which definitely hurts it, although that has nothing to do with Gary and just everything to do with how they specifically write Gary episodes, typically. Now let's get on to a problem that I think is just kind of an in-general problem for the whole show, and I don't know really how they would fix this unless they wrote like a number of episodes to specifically kind of address and establish this issue, which I don't think they do. Gary doesn't really have much of a consistent character, right? Like, I know he likes to eat a lot of food, and he doesn't like to take baths, and he sometimes does other things that are like a cat or a pet or whatever, but in general, there's a lot of inconsistencies and just kind of question marks about his character that kind of makes it difficult to write for him. I don't really know what Gary likes. I don't really know how intelligent he is, because sometimes he's a pet and sometimes he's, really smart, like in Sleepy Time. You don't really know, so it's kind of hard to know where the character stands. With a lot of other characters on the show, in fact, with pretty much every other character on the show, you know them really well. They're kind of basic character archetypes. SpongeBob is the ever happy optimist. Patrick is the idiot who sometimes, depending on his portrayal, is just like a nasty idiot and sometimes is a good-natured idiot. Squidward is just the perpetual grump, who just can never be happy and satisfied with the situation. He's always got to complain. Mr. Krabs is the greedy boss. Plankton is the evil little twerp. You kind of know these characters and you know their archetypes going into each episode, so it's easy to make jokes around them. It's easy to oh, Mr. Krabs likes money. You know that. You already know that going into any episode. Oh, Squidward doesn't like SpongeBob. You know that going into any episode. But with Gary, you never really know what his character is or what it's going to be in the episode, so it's hard to write more complicated story with Gary because there's not really a baseline for him. He's incredibly inconsistent, and I know to an extent all SpongeBob characters are somewhat inconsistent in that they are flexible in what they're allowed to do, not allowed to do because of the nature of the show. But with Gary, there just isn't any sort of baseline of anything, so it's hard to really get a feel for the character. And in each episode he's in, you kind of have to establish, okay, in this one he's just a dumb animal, or in this one he's, a super intelligent character. In this one he's just kind of snarky to SpongeBob. It's so different in every episode, it's hard to tell. And part of this is because he can't talk, so we don't really know too much about him, other than what we learned from SpongeBob, really. I don't have a problem with Gary as a whole. I think that when he is just this house pet that kind of snarks at SpongeBob, he just kind of rolls his eyes at whatever wacky thing SpongeBob's got going on, or, perpetually hungry Gary that's just always wanting to eat and never wants to take a bath. I think working with those very simple pet roles, he can serve as a good character in smaller doses. I think you could definitely do some good Gary episodes, but you would really have to break out of that stupid mold of SpongeBob misunderstandings, and you really kind of have to sell me on Gary's personality in each individual episode and tell me, why do I care about Gary? What does Gary like? What does Gary not like? Why is he the focus? If he's going to be anything but just a pet, you really need to establish that. So yeah, what do you guys think? Do you like Gary, not like Gary? Do you think that his episodes are good or bad or whatever? Why do you think is the reason for that? With that, PIEGUYRULZ, out.